Malayalam Manorama Webinar on Gandhiji and Decentralization in India. We are organizing this in connection with Mahatma Gandhi's first visit to Kerala on 18th August 1920. Actually, the visit was mainly for seeking support of the Khilafat Swadeshi movement and also for non-cooperation movement, which Gandhiji was about to start at that time against Rowlatt Act. But we thought, we will have a discussion on a subject which is so dear to Gandhiji, that is decentralization. So that's why we have selected this subject. This webinar is also organized by, sponsored by Star Pipes brand, Star Sanitary Ware. So now, Gandhiji visited Kerala 5 times, and the third and the last visit was known more because of the Vaikam Satyagraha and also the temple entry proclamation. So coming to our subject, Gandhiji wrote in 1908 about Gram Swaraj, village Swaraj, actually it is Hindu Swaraj. But after 30 years, in 1938, when he wrote again about it, he said, nothing has changed in this 30 years, which make me alter my views expounded in the first slide. And Gandhiji, as you know, his vision was every village has to become self-sufficient, a republic, which in a way is self-reliant, self-sufficient, and also self-sustainable. So 28 years after the 73rd amendment in our constitution, the Panchayat Raj, let us just look back and let us just analyze how far we could materialize the vision of Gandhi. If I remember correctly, Shankar Aiyar sir was Panchayat Minister for 5 years. He said, I still remember, I don't know whether he said in Parliament or he is outside. This is the single most important and revolutionary development in the country since we proclaimed our constitution. So, when we analyze the decentralization process, have we achieved a democratic decentralization, or have we achieved political decentralization, or have we achieved socio-economic decentralization? Let us have a discussion, because actually all the panelists, I don't have to name again, Shankar Aiyar, P.V. Rajagopal, Dr. George Mathew, S.M.Vijayanand, Dr. Meera, Velayudhan, all of you are very familiar with the subject and you are all actually well versed with the subject. So, from my part, actually, when starting this discussion, I myself have some questions, but while the discussion, I think the answer will come from all of you. Are the panchayats in our country truly local self-governments? Or are they mere representatives of state government? So, after passing the Panchayati Raj Act, how much autonomy is there now for the district, block, or village panchayats? And where do we stand in the question of Gram Sabhas? As I said earlier, every village has to become self-reliant, but are they? So, let us, and also 1/3 of reservation is mandatory now for women. Fine, it's implemented all over the country, but are the women getting true representation in the panchayats? In the question of financial resources, every state is asked to constitute a commission, finance commission, and they are supposed to assign the money to the panchayats, local bodies. But is it happening? I think in many states, actually, the finance commission has not been constituted, or after 5 years, I mean, it is just there without functioning. Also, there is reluctance from political leadership also to give up control over implementation of policies. So when we say about decentralization, also there is a question, have we decentralized the planning process itself? Maybe, I mean, in Kerala, there is a decentralization of planning. But in many other states, I mean, planning is not from below. I think the planning is something which is a trust upon the people from upwards. So let us have a discussion. I mean, as a moderator, I am not going to stand between the panelists and the listeners. Let me first request Shankar. As I said, he was handling Panchayat Raj, he was MP. Then also he is a strong advocate of decentralization and Panchayat Raj. So I am inviting Shankar, sir.
Some of the major objectives which Mahatma Gandhi had in mind when he talked about the importance of Panchayati Raj in independent India. I'll begin with a question that was posed to him in 1931, which was, "What is your dream for India?" And Gandhi replied, "I shall work for an India in which the poorest shall feel that it is their country, in whose making they have an effective voice." I'd like to just parse this sentence for you, just to remind you. Asked what his dream was, he answered, "I shall work." So he was not content to have dreams. He intended to work towards the goal of ensuring that the poorest shall feel that it is their country. Unless the institutions are conceived in such a way as to make the poorest feel that it is his country, the objective would not have been achieved. And for this purpose, he said, they must have an effective voice in the making of India. Now, if we remember this large goal, then I think we can see the gap between what was intended and what has been achieved. He later on presented his views to his very close associate, Sriman Narayan Agarwal, who then put it down in a book called Framework of a Gandhian Constitution. And there we see that he said independence must begin at the bottom. Not just development, not just democracy, but Swaraj itself, independence, must begin at the bottom, because true democracy cannot be worked by 20 men sitting at the center. That's almost an exact number who are in the cabinet committees. It has to be worked from people from below, by the people of every village. And I think the 64th Amendment, which became eventually the 73rd Amendment to the Constitution, was an attempt at fulfilling this goal. However, we were in a situation where, number one, the CPIM was the single biggest, loudest voice opposing the 64th Amendment. It was certainly the most effective voice. It was also the time in 1989 when the Sarkaria Commission on Center-State Relations had just presented its report. And of course, there were a number of scandals and other difficulties overtaking the Rajiv Gandhi government. And so there was a political opposition to Rajiv Gandhi, which manifested itself in opposition to the 64th and 65th Amendment bills. But happily, after Rajiv Gandhi was assassinated, all these anti-forces came together to back Narasimha Rao in seeking to pass the bill. So the bill that was eventually passed was an improvement in many respects on the Rajiv Gandhi bill. And to that, I think all the then opposition parties of 1989 made a signal contribution. And the consequence was that a bill which was basically Rajiv's conception, but with significant amendments made by the CPIM, the BJP, and others, particularly the VP Singh government, was what got passed. And we are therefore now talking about what is the stage of implementation of a bill to which, an amendment to which, every party in India, other than the DMK and the ADMK, made a single contribution. And when one considers that they all voted in favor of this bill, except for the two Dravidian parties, it is a disappointment to see that in many parts of India, there is little progress. It's encouraging to see that in every state, there is some progress. And Kerala, in particular, has, since Thomas Isaac's People's Planning Movement and the subsequent entry into power of the left government in Kerala, become a kind of exemplar for the country as a whole as to how to run this system in a federation. It is not an exact mirror image of what is provided for in the Constitution, but it does reflect the right of states to add their own special features. And the single biggest special feature in Kerala is the size of the village panchayat. You can go up to 30 or 30,000 people, as compared, for example, to Punjab, where almost no panchayat has a population larger than 2,000. Or Gandhiji's conception that a village panchayat will comprise approximately 100 or 200 people who will elect their 5 leaders. So we have in the structure a certain departure from the Gandhian conception, which came about because experience showed that the village is not an adequate unit for undertaking development projects of an economic nature or a social justice nature. So there was some justification to having a village panchayat that was larger than the Gandhian conception, especially because after the Ashok Mehta Committee report, which was only faithfully implemented in Karnataka, the intermediate panchayat, which was in Karnataka called the Taluka Panchayat, was the unit at which, or the Mandal Panchayat, that was the unit at which a lot of economic development and social justice activities were conducted. But rightly or wrongly, Rajiv Gandhi decided that he would rather go back to the 3-tier system, with the difference that whereas under the Balwantrai Mehta Committee, the intermediate panchayat was a committee, that's what is called the Samiti, the Panchayat Samiti. It was a committee of sarpanches, whereas that was elected directly by the electorate, and with many of the same conditions as for the village and the district. But these were to occupy 3 separate places, and happily the Kerala government acceded to this, even with their own modifications. And we have certainly or arguably the best system of operational Panchayati Raj in Kerala, where there has been genuine devolution of functions, finances, and functionaries. And we've seen in this COVID crisis that as a result of this traditional empowerment of the panchayats, not something that is being cooked up in the context of the pandemic, but over a period of time, we and its linkages to self-help groups and women's groups through the Kutumbashri program, we have a well-structured Panchayati Raj system in Kerala, and it is because this was in existence and was invoked from the beginning of the pandemic that the state which was most vulnerable to this imported disease has returned the best performance of any state in India. And in these circumstances, I think the Panchayat Raj system, with whatever modifications individual states wish to make, but structurally based on the Constitution Amendment and aimed at fulfilling the Constitution objectives, has proved indispensable to meeting an epidemic. Instead of being the worst affected state in the country, which was the apprehension in early or mid-March, the performance is such as to make us feel that this is where the answer lies. And if this is where the answer lies to face a pandemic, surely it is also where the answer lies in order to promote economic development and social justice in normal times. Now, there is much scope for improvement in Kerala, as I'm sure Vijayanand will, in his humble way, accept. But the fact is that whatever the room for improvement in Kerala, it is much smaller than the room for improvement in other states of India. Very broadly speaking, very broadly speaking, southern India, including recalcitrant Tamil Nadu, is the best performer. In western India, Maharashtra, Goa, they are very good performers. But I think we need to look at the Gujarat example. Why is it that Ahmedabad, in particular, is doing much worse in tackling this pandemic than any other city of comparable size in India? Comparable size, I'm not talking about the metros. And the state of Gujarat is far ahead of most other states of a comparable size than anywhere else. And I think it has a great deal to do with the neglect of Panchayati Raj institutions and municipalities in Gujarat compared to states like Maharashtra, which, although badly infected, is coping with admirable ability with the crisis. Karnataka, which is having to fight the pandemic more than once, with Tamil Nadu, where they have more or less succeeded in containing the epidemic, or the worst of the epidemic, to the major cities like Madurai and Chennai. And in the rest of India, there has to be a much greater and systemic involvement of the Panchayati Raj institutions, both in the immediate context as well as in the larger long-term context, in order to justify the premises and the objectives of the Panchayati Raj movement. I think we can regret 25 years after the bills were passed that there has not been adequate progress. But I think we can congratulate ourselves that even in Uttar Pradesh, the biggest laggard of them all, there has been some progress. And there's been some remarkable progress, or at least had been some remarkable progress, in states like Haryana, which had not initially showed a great capacity to handle this. Tripura, which is the most amazing example of a really backward state in terms of Panchayati Raj, rising to the fore. Sikkim and Himachal Pradesh among the hill states. And therefore, there is great hope despite the disappointment. And I comfort myself with a remark that Rajiv Gandhi made to me personally. It was in a private conversation. When I asked him how long he thought it would take to get his amendments operational, and he smiled and said, at least a generation. A generation generally is regarded as 25 years. And he didn't say a generation, he said at least a generation. So I think we should not give way to despair. At the same time, we need critical outside comment from within the state, because all states are jealous of their privileges. And I think the Kerala government will wonder who is this Tamilian to come and tell us what we should do. And I can assure you that any Tamil government, Tamil Nadu government, greatly resents even a Tamil MP who happens to be the Minister of Panchayati Raj from asking the Chief Minister to name a district in which he will accompany the Union Minister on a tour of the Panchayat. And significantly, I think, the gentleman who was then the Chief Minister of Gujarat was the only Chief Minister to refuse to allow the Union Minister to step into his state, and the consequence is what we have before us. So on the basis of this, let me repeat that the criticism has to come from within to be really effective. So with the Malayalam Manorama deciding to criticize the best performing state, it is an initiative that I greatly welcome. And I hope people like Vijayanand will not shut their ears with cotton wool, nor people like George Mathew simply celebrate a red day today and accept that there are things that could be improved even in communist Kerala. And having said that, I would like to yield the floor to the other panelists that you brought in, after saying to you, thank you very much, Malayalam Manorama, for having invited me to more or less inaugurate this panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Shankar sir. Very, very thought-provoking and very good speech. I mean, giving a lot of insights. Though there were political connotations in between. But let me now request Dr. Meera Velayudhan and what she has to say about the Panchayat Raj and also focusing on the women people.
I'd like to thank Manorama Group for holding this very significant discussion. And also I'm happy to be with so many esteemed people who have diverse experiences and on the ground itself. So I'm really happy to be part of this panel. But I'd like to bring here in this discussion, one is the whole, some bit of a historical part I'd like to bring. And that is about the economic thinking that went around in the nationalist movement and how it's linked with village development. How, even as early as Dadabhai Nauroji and R.C. Dutt and Ranade, they had the economic ideas that they had identified underlying nationalism was One is the declining crafts, which they felt was exemplified the state of the national body. And Gandhiji, in fact, built on that and brought it more into about reconstructing, revitalizing rural communities and reconstruction of villages as an alternative to the colonial industrial sort of rule that was there, that exemplified. So therefore, I think for Gandhiji, why it's very significant is that it was like he said that cloth is not just khadi is not cloth; it's an idea about this village revitalization. And there's very interesting kind of discussion that goes on between Gandhiji and Nehru. Some of the letters which takes place is that Gandhiji is saying that my idea of free India about the village reconstruction, and Nehru replies then sort of saying, how can a village embody truth and non-violence? So they have a very interesting exchange among themselves. And in fact, Gandhiji, as early as the 1931, the London Round Table Conference itself, in the discussion on election to the federal legislatures, actually talks about village as an electoral unit. So it goes back quite a lot. There's a whole there's no silence on it from 1909 onwards, but it's continuously there's the continuous thinking on it in terms of the village level, village as the unit of citizenship. And also, I think it's very interesting, the Constituent Assembly debates and the Constitution making itself is very important to discuss this, because when Baba Saheb Ambedkar introduced the draft Constitution in November 1948, this was the first time in that discussion in the Constituent Assembly that the whole question of Panchayati Raj came up. Of course, Baba Saheb had his own criticism. He thought it was localism and caste and all that. But also at the same time, he agreed that devolution was important. And then the discussion in the Constituent Assembly is very significant. My mother was also in the Constituent Assembly, Dakshayani, and she in fact said that how it was important for decentralization was very important underlying in terms of governance. So therefore the village panchayats were very significant in terms of governance. So therefore the village panchayats were very significant.
The office size that people can really handle. So the size of the governance is also very important. And it's also how do you govern? We are now speaking about non-violent governance. You see, if it's all based on violence, police and fear. What is this governance? Even genuine demands by people increase the price of our product. This is what farmers are asking. But the answer is police. When poor people are asking for land, the answer is police. So this is a very violent form of governance it's only based on fear and police. So I think what is a good governance system is based on love and respect. So Vinoba once said that remove your shoe like you remove your shoe when you go to temple or mosque, remove your shoe when you go to panchayat. Because don't politicize panchayat, because there let people be together and govern themselves, keeping their interest in mind, not the interest of the party in mind. So I think decentralization and governance is a very, very important issue that we need to discuss in a detailed manner. My last point that I want to make in this submission is, at the moment, that when you speak about decentralization of governance, you are only speaking about decentralization of political governance. What about the economic part? You see, the panchayat is given the power to decide. Decide what? All the land and resources and minerals are all transferred to multinational companies and national companies. And people have no control over any of those things. So if all the resources are taken away, all the minerals are given out to people outside, and you tell us, okay, you make decision. and what decision are we supposed to make? So without economic power, only giving power to make decisions will have no meaning. So I think this is a serious issue in many villages, because I work in Chhattisgarh, Madhya Pradesh, Jharkhand, Bihar. I see the resources are all driven away. Larger companies are in, and people are sitting together to make decisions, and they have nothing to decide. Right? They are only a subcontractor to the state. My concern is also about PESA, Panchayat extension into scheduled areas, where we have said, look, don't take anything away without consulting the local people. But this act is violated day and out. So we decentralize certain things which we don't follow. In areas where we have decentralization power, you don't have the economic power. So I think it's a serious issue for a country like India, that if you want to govern this country, run this country properly, then only decentralization of political and economic power is the way out. And then if it is a bottom up process, then I think that can be called a Gandhian process of decentralization or building a nation together. Yeah. Thank you very much, Vijayamohan.
Thank you, Rajagopal. A lot of insight into the present system and this decentralization of policies. Let me come to Dr. George Mathew. Actually, Dr. George Mathew, he has been in the field of panchayats for the last so many years. I remember he was organizing a meeting of women sarpanches in Delhi every year. Actually, we used to report that. And on this field, actually, especially in the field of panchayat. So let us hear from George Mathew what he has.
This is a highly relevant issue today for discussion and debate. And all the previous speakers have highlighted how important it was for Gandhiji and his followers to see that in independent India, there is a strong local community governed by themselves. So what has happened after that? We had a very detailed discussion so far. I would like to focus a couple of things which are very disturbing, and I am very concerned about what is happening today. I feel there are many enemies of panchayats or enemies of local governments. Power to the people is the concern we must develop. Power to the people. But power to the people, and it has enemies. Who are the enemies? First and foremost, the political leaders. It has been said in many ways, but the political leaders at every level, that is especially at the federal level or central level, state level, district level, they are very keen that the power must remain with them and it should not go down to the people who are getting elected in the villages and the gram panchayats. Now, many stories are there, and I don't want to go into the details of it. All the experts in this panel can understand this, and they can explain it more than me. The second enemy, I use the word this in a general sense, is the officials who are serving the government, the bureaucracy. And what we need is it a panchayati raj or a collector raj? It's a form, an idea sometimes come to my mind. In fact, Nirmal Mukherjee coined the term district government. We need district government. But do we have district government today? Or we have that the bureaucracy controlled the collector Raj today. So it can be explained that we are facing it every day. And is it what Gandhiji wanted? Is it what the 73rd Constitutional Amendment wanted to happen in this country? The third group of enemies, I would put it, is the landlords, the upper caste, the hierarchical system in this society.
I think Gandhi is still very, very relevant. I was reading through the report of the Royal Commission on Labor. See, this is 1929, a commission established by British Raj to look into the labor condition in India. And this lady, Margaret Read, she is writing something very interesting. She says this is basically peasant uproot in India. You are uprooting the peasantry of India and making them like machines. So for her, this is very, very, she felt it's very unfortunate that people who work in the field, play with their children, look after their family, and there is a multiple dimension of their personality growing, but they are transferred into slums and factories and becoming machines. So this was written back in 1929. So I think Gandhiji is very relevant today, that is not the kind of development model that is going to not only create a society, but also it is not going to help the individuals of a country. So COVID-19 is a great reminder of what Gandhi said. Look, your future is not in the cities and slums. Your future is in the villages, and you can stay in the villages only if land and resources are available. So we need to really reconsider the development model and say, rather than giving land and resources to multinational companies, how do we give it to the poor people? Now let me bring this example of Brazil, right? Now there is a new term called Brazilization of India. Now what is happening now is Brazilization of India. Brazil 2.5 times bigger than India, with a small population. 80% people are living in slums and cities. Now, India, we were proud that 80% people live in cities, the villages. Now, only 65 are living in villages. We have driven 15% people out of villages by forcing them. So I think this Brazilization process need to end. So this is important that we understand the situation and respond to it. And that is where this idea of strengthening Gram Sabha, strengthening Panchayat Raj, giving them the control over resources, giving them control over decision making. This is very, very important, I think, and this is what we should aim to achieve through our future programs, and that is where Gandhi comes alive. Now, I will conclude by saying it is not there is no absence of examples, a lack of examples, because some of our friends went to study the Swiss model of autonomy at the village level. That may not be applicable here. That is applicable in a country where 100% people are literate, etc. But then still, there is a model to look at. I was looking at this northern autonomous region of Nicaragua. See, this is an interesting model where including the judiciary is in the village, sitting there, and they decide what should be the punishment for a small crime. Only if it is a big crime, this will be transferred to the national police or national government. The Colombian model of self-identification. Like in Colombia, you can decide what you want to be. You want to be an Afro-descendant person, you want to be a Misti, or what you want to be. Here, you see people lining up in front of offices for a certificate that I am an Adivasi, please give me a certificate. I am a Dalit, please give me a certificate. It takes so much of our time getting a certificate and paying for it and running for it. And I was very impressed by this idea of identification, that I identify what I am and I'm honest. Please believe me when I say that I'm so and so, right? And also the transition model that you see in Europe, where people are rejecting this top-down model and deciding how we want to organize our society and transition movement. Cities are into transition, the villages are into transition. So I think there are many models from where one can learn, and I think they are all referring to Gandhi. You know, many of these people who are doing this are referring to Gandhi. This is high time that Indians also start looking back to Gandhi and taking ideas from him and implementing it in order to make this country a better place. Thank you.
I would like to whether George Mathew or Vijayanand sir would like to add anything.
Quick answer to the question whether politics should be there in Gram Panchayats. I would say it is a honest question. There is a question of honesty. In the rest of India, they say there is no politics, but there is informal politics, which is more dangerous. If you are politically identified, your acts will reflect on the political party which is ruling the state or center. But if you say that you are partyless, you can do whatever you want and get away. So this political identification has some negatives, but it brings in an accountability, which is very, very important because states and center is run by parties. The other question is the future. Ultimately, decentralization is political, and political signals are weak. You will be shocked. The 25th anniversary of the Panchayat Raj amendment was not observed even by states in which parties which passed the amendment were ruling. So it is out of the political horizon, out, I must also say, out of the journalistic horizon, out of the academic horizon, and shockingly, it is out of the activist horizon. Activists have a rights, migrants, everything. Very few activists are for Panchayat. So that way, it is weak. But COVID, as is mentioned, has brought in some willy-nilly that they are in the trend and probably something will. And no ups and downs. It has been consistent across 25 years and probably 5 decades. So if governmental change have not affected fiscal decentralization, the state is very likely it will be affected. And using fiscal decentralization money to push innovations. The gender plan, 10% of the funds is for gender. And another 10% is for different groups, children, aged, differently abled. So these kind of things, using a fiscal push or certain local innovations, the freedom is included. Predictability, it is in the budget, it's according to a formula, it's a fair formula. Not even the chief minister can technically allot 1 rupee to his or her country. This is unheard of in fiscal decentralization in India, whether it be at the center or the state. This has been operational for nearly 22 years now. And so this fairness is also there, and equity. Backward panchayats get more. And what are the results of this fiscal decentralization? Excellent basic minimum needs infrastructure in the last 22 years. Poverty has come down sharply. Public services have improved. And it's not my impression. The NFHS data shows, or I think it's the NSSO data, not NFHS, NSSO data, between 2015 and 2020 says, in 2015, about 24% of the people used government hospitals, and now it is 48%. And post-COVID, it may go up to about 50%. And over the last 5 years, about 3 to 5 lakh students have come back to government schools from private schools. So they are all with panchayats. They are not with them. So service delivery is there. And most touching part, what I call care and compassion. And panchayats seem to be doing better. Palliative care of Kerala is the best in the world. Care of the disabled, care of mentally challenged children. So all this, the panchayats have been doing very well. But there are, as Manishankar was saying, there are negatives also. We have not succeeded very much in economic development, particularly production, productivity, and jobs. Local economic development, I don't think it's not gone down, it's gone up. Again, rather a shame for Kerala. We have not done very well for the scheduled tribes who have been marginalized. We are as marginalized as any other Adivasi group in India. And also, little surprising, the traditional fisherfolk. They have not gained as other groups have gained from decentralization. And accountability is very strong. The political accountability. Meera, madam, I would request you to document a day in the life of a panchayat member, particularly during COVID times, like Professor Leela Gulati did 3 decades back. It will be absolutely amazing the level of the accountability, which is not formal kind of thing, but very much real. But unfortunately, Kerala's social audit is extremely weak. It is a numpty versus social. It's a contradiction. There is accountability, but not the kind of social accountability which we will do. So in that sense, this participation, Antyodaya, the social justice part, it is done. Now quickly, a national scenario. SFCs were mentioned. Do you know all SFCs have to be constituted every 5 years from 1994? It's mandatory. It's constitution. Do you know only 5 states in India, as per the MOPR statistics, have constituted 6th State Finance Commission, and 10 are in the 5th State Finance Commission state, and 4 are still in the 4th State Finance Commission. So which means we are violating constitution with the and the Union Finance Commission, I should congratulate them. That is, of all the constitutional institutions of local government, right from Gram Sabha up to the Union Finance Commission, one institution which has played its part better than anticipated is the Union Finance Commission, which in the 13th gave about 67,000 crores to the Gram Panchayat, and the 14th, I was the Secretary of Panchayat Raj at the time, we were baffled by the generous 2 lakh crore to Gram Panchayats, and if India's finances don't collapse, this may increase to about 4 crores going by the first years. So let me conclude. The Finance Commission grant plus the NGNREGs at the current rate, without a major economic collapse, would be anywhere between 8 to 10 lakh crore for the 2.5 lakh Gram Panchayats over the next 5 years. And Panchayats can do a lot of costless development. The big positive lesson of COVID is that a new local governance coalition is emerging, even in areas where Panchayats are practically non-existent. The Gram Panchayat people, the civil society, and the SHGs are coming, and they are constituting the front line of government. So we now need action, and we need lobbying from big journals that we need governance reform. India needs governance reform. We're all trying all kinds of anti-poverty programs and social programs and all that. And what is vocal for the local? Vocal for the local is not vocal for the commercial interests of India. It is vocal for the panchayat, for the people. And just to conclude, there is no developed country in the world without an elected, empowered local government, even if it is a dictatorship. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan sir. We have received some questions also from viewers who are listening to this webinar. One question is from John Joseph. He is asking, does the panel appreciate the intention and spirit of the 73rd and 74th Constitutional Amendment, that the local body governance ought to be free from party politics? Second question is from CG. What is the importance of Gandhian ideology of Gram Swaraj in a post-COVID India? The third question is from Dr. K. Girishan. It took more than 4 decades to realize the dream of Gandhiji about panchayats to come to reality. Since then, almost 3 decades have passed, and even now, genuine decentralization has not happened in most parts of India. What is its possibility in future? So these are the questions, and I think Shankar sir will be the right person to answer for this.
I said the first is with respect to elections. You know, the original 64th Amendment Bill provided that the guidelines for contesting elections and for the conduct of elections would be prepared by the Central Election Commission in consultation with the state election commissions. Unfortunately, the 73rd Amendment, I think it's the most negative aspect of the 73rd Amendment, is that the role of the Central Election Commission was completely deleted. And in many states, there has been heavy politicization of the state election commissions. In fact, there's also been, in recent times, heavy politicization of the Central Election Commission. But the state has been a very unfortunate situation. And although at one time we had a very, very effective leadership given by the head of the Rajasthan Election Commission to his counterparts, I think in recent times, this kind of coordination on the election front has not been taking place. And in consequence, there is a very simple equation that has come into existence. The less effective Panchayati Raj is, the more corruption there is in elections. And I think one example will suffice. In Uttar Pradesh, there is rampant corruption. There's rampant use of muscle power and money power in the elections to get all kinds of undesirable elements elected who then grab the money because there isn't effective Panchayati Raj there and use it for their own purposes. In Kerala, I get the impression that the extent of corruption is very, very significantly less. And that is because there is a general ethos in which Panchayati Raj is functioning effectively, which means that the Gram Sabhas are kept informed, that people are aware of what is happening, that social audit in the Gram Sabhas takes place regularly, that local authorities charged with audits, they are active. And so we find that the incentive to go into panchayats in Kerala, unlike the other extreme, which I would regard as Uttar Pradesh, is not so much the venality of the individual, but a desire to undertake social service. So, in these circumstances, I think elections, there's also one other problem. Gandhiji thought elections were going to take place in the village panchayat where there would be around 200 or 300 voters. In other words, it would be like a college election where all the voters knew all the candidates and therefore would make up their own minds. But if you have an electorate of 30,000, then the temptation to indulge in corruption is increased. Now, I know that UP doesn't have 30,000 electorate, but because the panchayat system there is so ineffective, you find that people get in and use it for and misuse it for their own purposes. So there is clearly a need for the Central Election Commission, at the instance of the central government, to undertake a review of the way in which elections are taking place at the panchayat level and to suggest reforms that will make the whole process more transparent and more honest. As regards the other questions, which effectively related to the Gram Sabha's empowerment, I think the big gap, the big lacuna in the 64th Amendment was that there's no mention of Gram Sabhas there. And we owe it largely to the Secretary Rural Development in 1992, who went on to play a major role in Panchayati Raj in Andhra Pradesh, his home state. This was a gentleman called Shankar, who brought in the concept of Gram Sabhas into the 73rd Amendment, but failed to press us, and we failed to do this adequately, spell out what is the constitution of the Gram Sabha, which can obviously not be the same when you have 30,000 members of the Gram Sabha and 200 members of the Gram Sabha. So therefore, the innovation has come, particularly under left governments in West Bengal and Kerala, where what the West Bengalis call the Gram Sansad. And I think in Kerala, these are called the ward sabhas. Anyway, that apart from the larger unit called the Gram Sabhas, there are more manageable units at the ward level or at the wards level, which are able to perform the function of social audit and holding the panchayats responsible. Also, the worse the panchayat Raj, as in UP, you get Sarpanch Raj. I know that George was mentioning Collector Raj, but I think Collector Raj is much less an evil of the Panchayati Raj system in the 21st century than Sarpanch Raj, which was really not anticipated when we were drafting the Constitution Amendment. But this has become a reality in many parts of the country. And the only way of removing it is to ensure that it is not the Sarpanch who reports to the Gram Sabha, but all the Panchayat members, and that they are held responsible for their individual portfolios, which of course presupposes that there are portfolios that the members hold, and that it is from them that proposals emanate which are accepted by the panchayats. And I think what we need in the country as a whole is a provision that is very special to the PESA states or the PESA areas. That is the Panchayat Extension to Scheduled Areas Act 1996, which provides that no proposal of the panchayat can be implemented until it has been approved by the Gram Sabha. Now, once that is done, then people's participation in planning and implementation becomes real. Otherwise, they just remain a sounding board. And I would urge that especially the better states like Kerala to spell out either in their legislation or in administrative orders that are issued what exactly should be the composition of the Gram Sabha or its subordinate units. Who should speak up? Should there be a special section for women to express their opinions? In Kerala, I think because of education, women are pretty much self-sufficient and are capable of articulating what they want to say. But the further north you move, I'm afraid the capacity of women to express themselves goes down. So the Rajiv Gandhi concept of Mahila Sabhas, which will meet before the Gram Sabha meeting, and then through a Sathin or a spokeswoman, their views will be communicated to the Gram Sabha, and through the Gram Sabha to the panchayats, is an innovation that we need to be thinking about now to make the voice of women more effective and the voice of the general populace in the Gram Sabhas more effective. In other words, the kind of initiative that has been taken in the Karnataka legislation, their Gram Swaraj Act, which was passed 2 or 3 years ago, it has unfortunately not been implemented owing to political uncertainty at the state level. But that act, which I think Kerala is too proud to look at, I think Kerala should look at the Karnataka Panchayat Raj, the most recent Karnataka Panchayat Raj Act, to see whether some of the features of that act, which include the concept of a Panchayat Administrative Service, which include very detailed provisions for district planning of a slightly different order to what is happening under people's planning, and so on and so forth, should be looked at. I think we need to have better administered Panchayat Raj states meet separately and worse administered Panchayat states meet together. But for all that, you need a very active union panchayat minister. And I hate to say this because I'm not attempting to boost myself. I'm trying to boost Panchayat Raj. My successors for the last 11 years in the Union Ministry of Panchayat Raj have not regarded Panchayat Raj as their principal portfolio. And this means that there is a tremendous lacuna to be filled. At the same time, I think it's a great pity that except in Kerala, where you have a common department for local government, in no other state, to the best of my knowledge, and certainly not at the center, do you have a common ministry for the panchayats and the municipalities, or the panchayats and the nagarpalikas, as Rajiv Gandhi wanted to call them. So once you do this, then the fact that we are having this kind of massive migration of the rural population to urban India and the increasing urbanization of India, where already approximately 2/3 of our population is in urban areas, and especially in the intermediate towns, which have town panchayats, there is an intimate connection between rural and urban India. If these were established under a single or under the supervision of a single authority, I think we will be able to get much more effective, people-oriented Panchayati Raj than is true if we continue the colonial practice of regarding local government in urban areas as a distinct and separate entity from local self-government in rural areas. About women's representation, I just want to bring to your attention a statistic that is somehow never ever highlighted, although I regard that as the one really great success of the Panchayati Raj system. It is that as against Rajiv's intention of reserving 30% of the seats in the panchayats for women, now both seats and posts are reserved to the extent of 50% in 15 states of India, in which list of honor Kerala does not figure. And I'm surprised that Kerala does not figure. If it does, I'm willing to be corrected by Vijayanand. So if it does, very good. But in my day, and because, Vijayanand, in his remarks, mentioned 1/3. So I was a bit taken aback at that. But anyway, if it is, as I see from his noddings on the camera, it seems as if Kerala has also come to the stage of enlightenment. We should certainly build upon the achievement of having 14 lakh elected women representatives in our local government institutions. There are more elected women in India alone than in the rest of the world put together. I want Malayalam Manorama to make this its headline, because people don't know. And why don't they know? It is because upper middle class women of the kind who will get into parliament and the state legislatures do not think the empowerment of their humbler sisters constitutes a social achievement. So they are focused on legislatures and parliament. And that is why the most active women's rights groups regard it as kind of denigrating the need for women's empowerment if they accept that women are already almost 50% in our village panchayats and in our Panchayat Raj institutions. Whereas in the parliament and state legislatures, their percentage is a pathetic 7 or 8%. And we need to bring women's representation into the panchayats and the state legislatures. But so long as we make that conditional, on 1/3 of men for no reason other than that they are men losing their seats in order to accommodate women. It's not going to happen. It can only happen if, in my view, that's my proposition, that every single parliamentary constituency which exists today should be divided into two, or alternatively, to have double member constituencies, as we used to have back in the first Lok Sabha, so that 50% of the membership becomes women automatically. And that is when we can really say with pride that women have been empowered.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for that. I would like to know whether.
I'd like to come in. I'd like
I would like to know what Meera Velayudhan has to say about this.
Yes, I'd like to come in because I think there's an error. Kerala has over 50%, 52% almost of elected women members. And I'll just like to give it some context because I think the way the women's empowerment as well as women's political participation, there's a context. In the 1990s, there was a shift in Kerala with the people's planning program from unions and which play a very significant were actually political entities. From that to the elected women members, but also a whole range of other institutions which are set up like the neighborhood groups, the Kudumbashri. These are collective. So therefore, there's a shift from say the unions to citizenship with a whole range of objectives. And these sort of really strengthen the women who are elected in the panchayat. So you have now that among the elected, those who contest for the elected member, they are predominantly from the Kudumbashri units, so the women who are. So there's a kind of apprenticeship that is coming through in terms of how you build constituencies, how you take up issues, how you broaden your support from these sort of collectives, and how which enables them and gives them that kind of significance to contest elections. Of course, there is so therefore I think this shift that the decentralization took place in terms of building these other collectives around the panchayats in terms of Kudumbashri and various other these I think and they are women centered. So therefore, I think that sort of brings a big change in terms of those women who are elected, and also majority of the women. There are now, in fact, more women elected members than men in the panchayat levels now in Kerala. So there's a big shift in that case. Of course, there's a gap in terms of going to the next level in terms of the assembly level, but I think that is there because power is not only constituted at this level. There are other spheres where interest groups and power is shaped. So therefore, to negotiate this, I think one of the discussion that in the women's movement that is taking place is that what are the other spaces also need to be democratized apart from these in terms of the political class or the political culture. Those also need to be democratized for women to sort of move ahead of the panchayats into say the state assemblies at that section there. So therefore, I'd like to correct this that, it's the People's Planning Program and the decentralization which created these other kind of collectives, which sort of strengthened the elected women's role as well as their perform. It could sort of, so therefore, there was a kind of strengthening through other kinds of where actually citizenship is the focus. Women's citizenship gets a focus because there are so many objectives, and therefore that sort of strengthens and also gives that kind of agency training also in terms of skill development, how to negotiate, how to look at failures, how to look at successes, how to do consensus building, alliance building. I think these are very much part of when you form even a group like Kudumbashri, because you're going to get different kind of sections into it, particularly you're focusing on the marginalized sections. Secondly, I think the significant thing is along with decentralization, you also need a redistributive agenda. I think that is the Kerala thing, is that you need a redistributive agenda. Although I think there is a lot to be done in terms of Dalits and Adivasis and fishing communities. I think these still remain sort of areas that need more kind of thing. But at the same time, I think this redistributive agenda is very much needs to be there, and therefore that sort of also shapes a political in terms of the political interventions. I think when the People's Planning Program started, the first, in the beginning itself, under the veteran leader EMS Nambudripad, there was a high-level committee that was set up when the People's Planning Program was started, which had all political groups at that stage. But then slowly it's sort of it's also got to do with what's happening to the multi-party systems and the other coalitions that's happening, and these sort of have an impact on the local governance politics. But I still feel that women are able to go beyond say, even if they're elected from a political party, they are able to really exercise the agency at many levels. But there is also socially there is a kind of which has come which is, I think, needs more analysis, is why is there so much of a lot of patriarchal political culture in terms of women's participation in public life. And you can see the kind of thing targeting that even a minister like Shailaja Teacher underwent during this pandemic, in spite of this big public role that was being played and significant role of health. That you can just see, what are the kind of attitudes politically that exist. So I think there are all these odds that need to be overcome, and that's what I'd like to say.
Would any of the panelists like to add anything to these questions which were raised from our viewers?
The question about the Gandhian ideology and its relevance, and also future possibilities, I thought I should respond to that, because today's discussion is framed around Gandhiji's visit to Kerala, and so I was reflecting what were the agenda around which Gandhi was visiting Kerala. So one was his concern about untouchability. So if you have seen this book written by Varun Ray, Gandhi's campaign against untouchability was mainly Gandhi's work in Tamil Nadu and Kerala. And he says in his book that when I was against Gandhi, but when I went to British Library in London, I happened to see a lot of letters written by the then collectors of British Raj to the Queen, and these are all complained against Gandhi about his work among Harijans. So he said, look, I for the first time I realized that Mahatma Gandhi did so much for Harijans, and then he came back and wrote this book, Gandhi's Campaign Against Untouchability, and became a very popular hit. So that was one important concern of Mahatma Gandhi. But what is happening today? And the second concern was Hindu-Muslim Maitri, the idea of communal harmony. And today we are again facing the same problem of disharmony in the country. And his focus on last person that we are discussing today, through Panchayat Raj, can we reach out to the last person? So I think Gandhi is still very, very relevant. I was reading through the report of the Royal Commission on Labour. See, this is 1929, a commission established by British Raj to look into the labour condition in India. And this lady, Margaret Read, she is writing something very interesting. She says this is basically peasant uproot in India. You are uprooting the peasantry of India and making them like machines. So for her, this is very, very, she felt it's very unfortunate that people who work in the field, play with their children, look after their family, and there is a multiple dimension of their personality growing, but they are transferred into slums and factories and becoming machines. So this was written back in 1929. So I think Gandhiji is very relevant today, that is not the kind of development model that is going to not only create a society, but also it is not going to help the individuals of a country. So COVID-19 is a great reminder of what Gandhi said. Look, your future is not in the cities and slums. Your future is in the villages, and you can stay in the villages only if land and resources are available. So we need to really reconsider the development model and say, rather than giving land and resources to multinational companies, how do we give it to the poor people? Now let me bring this example of Brazil. Right now, there is a new term called Brazilization of India. Now, what is happening now is Brazilization of India. Brazil, 2.5 times bigger than India, with a small population. 80% people are living in slums and cities. Now, India, we were proud that 80% people live in cities, the villages. Now, only 65 are living in villages. We have driven 15% people out of villages by forcing them. So I think this Brazilization process need to end. So this is important that we understand the situation and respond to it. And that is where this idea of strengthening Gram Sabha, strengthening Panchayat Raj, giving them the control over resources, giving them control over decision making. This is very, very important, I think, and this is what we should aim to achieve through our future programs, and that is where Gandhi comes alive. Now, I will conclude by saying it is not there is no absence of examples, a lack of examples, because some of our friends went to study the Swiss model of autonomy at the village level. That may not be applicable here. That is applicable in a country where 100% people are literate, etc. But then still, there is a model to look at. I was looking at this northern autonomous region of Nicaragua. See, this is an interesting model where including the judiciary is in the village, sitting there, and they decide what should be the punishment for a small crime. Only if it is a big crime, this will be transferred to the national police or national government. The Colombian model of self identification. Like in Colombia, you can decide what you want to be. You want to be an Afro descendant person, you want to be a Misti, or what you want to be. Here, you see people lining up in front of offices for a certificate that I am an Adivasi, please give me a certificate. I am a Dalit, please give me a certificate. It takes so much of our time getting a certificate and paying for it and running for it. And I was very impressed by this idea of self identification, that I identify what I am and I am honest. Please believe me when I say that I am so and so, right? And also the transition model that you see in Europe, where people are rejecting this top-down model and deciding how we want to organize our society and transition movement. Cities are into transition, the villages are into transition. So I think there are many models from where one can learn, and I think they are all referring to Gandhi. Many of these people who are doing this are referring to Gandhi. This is high time that Indians also start looking back to Gandhi and taking ideas from him and implementing it in order to make this country a better place. Thank you.
George Mathew or Vijayanand sir would like to add anything?
Quick answer to the question whether politics should be there in Gram Panchayat. I would say it's a honest question. There is a question of honesty. The rest of India, they say there is no politics, but there is informal politics, which is more dangerous. If you are politically identified, your acts will reflect on the political party which is ruling the state or center. But if you say that you are partyless, you can do whatever you want and get away. So this political identification has some negatives, but it brings in an accountability, which is very, very important, because states and center is run by parties. The other question is the future. Ultimately, decentralization is political, and political signals are weak. You will be shocked. The 25th anniversary of the Panchayat Raj amendment was not observed even by states in which parties which passed the amendment were moving. So it is out of the political horizon, out, I must also say, out of the journalistic horizon, out of the academic horizon, and shockingly, it is out of the activist horizon. Activists of our rights, migrants, everything. Very few activists are for Panchayat. So that way, it is weak. But COVID, as is mentioned, has brought in some willy-nilly that they are in the front and probably something will.
One of the most important factors which contributed to the success of, I use the word success, of Panchayat so far in Kerala is the land reform we had in Kerala. Because of land reform, there were structural changes in the society. Now, Mani used the states examples of North India, UP, and other places. Without land reform, I can say here in this conversation that these local governments cannot function because the powerful people are the landlords and they continue to do their power, exercise their power even after 73 years or even after 7,500 years, they will be powerful. And the other issues of democracy may not have that kind of depth and meaning. And this is an issue we have to do. And finally, I would like to say a people's movement for strengthening Panchayati Raj is very important. I hope Manishankar Aiyar will lead and we will follow you, Mani. You lead from Tamil Nadu to Kashmir, a people's movement for giving power to the people. And the people are in the villages of India. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Now it is almost 2 hours. We have started the discussion, and I think we have covered many of the topics in the Panchayati Raj system, the local self-government, also the Gandhian ideals about that, and the Rajagopal was referring about even Nicaragua and all that, and judiciary in panchayats. Actually, the Nyaya Panchayat was not there in the 73rd Amendment. Actually, there was no mention about Nyaya Panchayats in that. So, from Malayalam Manorama, I should thank each one of the panelists, Manishankar Aiyar sir, also P.V. Rajagopal sir, Dr. George Mathew, S.M.Vijayanand, then Dr. Meera, Velayudhan. All of you have contributed a lot of ideas to this webinar, and actually I think it's very relevant. And the readers also. There are a lot of questions actually because of passage of time. I could not give you all those questions, and there are a lot of questions actually. People participated in a very, very, very enthusiastically about this webinar. So thank you very much.